the man who designed the defense of Okinawa, did not believe it could be won. Colonel Hiromichi Yahara was the senior staff officer of the Japanese 32nd Army. He had spent 2 years in the United States as an exchange officer in the 1930s, and he had concluded before the first American landing craft touched the beach that his army was going to be destroyed. His plan was not to win. It was to make the Americans pay for every yard for as long as physically possible, to buy time for the home islands. The plan worked. One hill, 50 feet high, cost a single United States Marine Division 2,662 men. The hill had no name on any Japanese map. The Marines who had to take it called it Sugar Loaf, because from a distance it looked like a loaf of bread sitting on a shell-blasted plateau. It was about 50 feet high and 300 yards long, a bare rocky rise on the western end of the Japanese line covering the town of Shuri. It was honeycombed with caves and connecting tunnels, and it was covered by fire from 2 other hills behind it, so that anyone standing on top of Sugar Loaf could be shot at from 3 directions at once. That was not an accident of geography. It was a design. It changed hands 11 times in 7 days. The unit that finally held it was the 6th Marine Division, and the fight, 6,062 casualties in killed and wounded, plus well over 1,000 men evacuated for combat fatigue. One man received the Medal of Honor for the night of 14 to the 15th of May 1945. He was Major Henry Yerold, practicing attorney from Duluth, Minnesota, and he was the executive officer of the 2nd Battalion, the 2nd Officer, 2nd Battalion Marine. There is a Marine Corps base on Okinawa named after him today. Hit subscribe now, because the reason we know what the Japanese command was thinking during all of this is that Colonel Yahara was specifically ordered by his commanding general not to kill himself. He was told to escape, survive, and report the truth about what had happened, which he eventually did, at book length. Don't go anywhere. To understand why a 50-foot hill mattered enough to spend a division on, the story has to start 6 weeks earlier, on a beach where almost nothing happened, and with the argument inside the Japanese headquarters about why. To understand Sugar Loaf, the story has to go back to April 1945, when the largest amphibious operation of the Pacific War put American troops ashore on Okinawa, and the Japanese army did not contest the landing at all. What was decided in the Japanese headquarters in the months before that is the reason the last battle of the Second World War looked the way it did. It started with an officer who had done the arithmetic and did not like it. It ended with a line of hills that had to be taken one at a time in the open by men on foot. Yahara's assessment was cold, and it was correct. The 32nd Army was outnumbered, outgunned, and would receive no meaningful reinforcement. Any attempt to hold the beaches would put his infantry in the open under naval gunfire from a fleet he could not answer, and would destroy his army in a week. Any mass counterattack would do the same thing faster, so he proposed the opposite of everything Japanese doctrine had done for 3 years: concede the beaches, concede the airfields, go underground in the southern hills and make the Americans come to you. The terrain of southern Okinawa is coral limestone, which is soft enough to dig and hard enough to hold a tunnel. Japanese engineers and conscripted labor cut an enormous underground network through the ridgelines south of the Shuri line, with connecting galleries, ammunitions, firing positions sited so that each hill covered its neighbors. The design principle was mutual support. No single position could be taken in isolation, because taking it exposed you to 2 or 3 others. Sugar Loaf was one node in that network, and not the largest one. It mattered because of where it sat, not because of what it was. On the 5th of April 1945, the American landing met almost nothing. Marines came ashore expecting the worst hours of their lives and walked inland. The northern 2/3 of the island were cleared in about 2 weeks. Then the American advance turned south, and every yard from that point on had to be bought at the price Yahara had set. By the 2nd week of May, the line had reached the outer defenses of Shuri, and the western anchor of those defenses was 3 low hills the Marines would name Sugar Loaf, Half Moon, and Horseshoe. There was an argument inside the Japanese command about all of this, and Yahara lost it once. Lieutenant General Isamu Cho, the 32nd Army's Chief of Staff, believed attrition was defeatism and pushed for a general offensive. On the 4th of May 1945, the Army commander, Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, sided with Cho and attacked. It failed, and it cost the 32nd Army several thousand men it could not replace. Ushijima then returned to Yahara's method and stayed with it. That failed counterattack is the reason the fighting at Sugar Loaf 10 days later was conducted the way it was, from inside the rock. The 6th Marine Division reached the ground in front of Sugar Loaf on the 12th of May 1945. The problem was visible from the first hour, and it did not change for a week. The approach to the hill is open. There is no covered route to its base, no dead ground and no flank. Anything moving toward it can be seen from the crest and from Half Moon and Horseshoe behind it, and all three are mutually supporting. Taking Sugar Loaf without taking the other two meant standing on a bare 50-foot rise with fire arriving from two directions you could not reach. So the pattern established itself immediately. Marines would cross the open ground, get onto the slope, or occasionally the crest, and then be driven off it by fire from behind the hill, or by counterattack from inside it. Then the artillery would work the hill over, and the next company would try. Company G of the 22nd Marines was down to 75 able-bodied men after the first day. The hill changed hands 11 times. The Japanese garrison did not have to hold the top continuously. They only had to be able to come back up through the tunnels, which they could and did every night for a week. The officer this story follows was not a career Marine. Henry Alexius Courtney Jr. was born in Duluth, Minnesota, on the 6th of January 1916. He went to Duluth Central High School, graduated from the University of Minnesota, took a law degree at Loyola University in Chicago, and was admitted to the bar in both Minnesota and Illinois. Before the war, he practiced at a Duluth firm called Courtney & Courtney, alongside his father. He was commissioned into the Marine Corps Reserve in February 1940, and by 1945 he had already been through the Guadalcanal campaign. By the afternoon of the 14th of May 1945, he was the executive officer of the 2nd Battalion, 22nd Marines, and the battalion had been attacking Sugar Loaf for 3 days. That afternoon, the battalion commander ordered another assault. It stalled on the slope. When it stopped, Courtney and about 44 other Marines were stranded partway up a bare hill in the open, with Japanese troops above them rolling grenades down the incline, and more than 100 other Marines already killed or wounded on the ground behind them. They were too few to hold where they were, and too exposed to go back down in daylight. That is where the first half of this story ends. Everything to this point is set up. What follows happened inside about 12 hours on a rise 50 feet high. It is the evening of the 14th May 1945. The order from above is to hold where they are and dig in for the night. That order is entirely reasonable, and Courtney does not think it will work. He is on an exposed slope with a small force, below an enemy who owns the high ground, and he expects a night counterattack, because that is what the Japanese have done every night so far. His reasoning is recorded in his Medal of Honor citation and in the letter his division commander wrote recommending him. He weighed the effect of a hostile night counterattack against the tactical value of an immediate assault and decided in favor of attacking. The logic is bleak and it is sound. His force is too weak to defend where it is. If they stay, they get attacked at a time and place the enemy chooses. If they go up now, in the dark they at least choose. He requested permission to advance and seize the forward slope, and it was granted. Then he had to ask the men. By the account that has come down through the 6th Marine Division and through his citation file, Courtney told them he was going up Sugar Loaf Hill and asked who was going with him. Every man there stood up. That is roughly 44 Marines, most of them tired, some of them wounded at night, going up a hill that had been taken and lost times already. There is no version of that decision that anyone can make for another person. They made it individually, and they all made it the same way. The assault went up in darkness. The citation records what Courtney personally did on the way. He led from the front, destroying cave positions and neutralizing guns as he went. This is close work. Sugar Loaf's caves are firing slits at knee height and tunnel mouths in rock, and clearing them at night means getting within a few feet with grenades and demolition charges. They reached the crest. Courtney sent back for ammunition and reinforcements, and then observed a large Japanese force assembling below the reverse slope for a counterattack. He attacked that too. Rather than wait on the crest for a formed assault to hit his 40-odd men, he pushed forward over the top and broke the assembly up before it started. For a period in the early hours of the 15th May 1945, a scratch force of exhaust Sugar Loaf Hill, which no American unit had managed to hold overnight in 3 days of trying. Courtney then did what officers do at that point. He moved among them, repositioned them, and helped the wounded in the open under mortar fire. It took a long time to get the numbers in this one right, because the accounts differ on how many went up. If this is the history you want more of, hit like, one like, nothing more. The figure most often given is 44 Marines besides Courtney. Some accounts say about 50. His divisional commander's recommendation letter and the Medal of Honor citation both describe a small remaining force without putting a number on it. 44 is the figure in the most detailed accounts, and it is the one used here. A Japanese mortar burst killed Major Henry A. Courtney, Jr. on the crest of Sugar Loaf Hill in the early hours of the 15th May 1945. He was 29 years old. The mortar fire and the counterattacks continued through what was left of the night. By morning, the force he had led up the hill was down to 15 men. 15 Marines cannot hold 300 yards of exposed crest against an enemy who can come back up through tunnels, and they did not. The survivors came off Sugar Loaf on the 15th May, and the hill changed hands again. The fighting there went on for 3 more days. On the 15th of May, a single platoon of the 29th Marines that reached the top expended around 350 grenades, and was down to 11 men before it withdrew. Elsewhere on the hill that day, the 22nd Marines fought off a counterattack at close quarters. Sugar Loaf was finally held on the 18th of May 1945, and it was only holdable once. Half Moon and Horseshoe behind it had been dealt with, which is exactly what the design of the position had been intended to require. Here is what the 7 days cost. The 6th Marine Division took 2,662 casualties in killed and wounded at Sugar Loaf and the 2 hills behind it, and evacuated more than 2,200 additional men for combat fatigue. The Okinawa campaign as a whole killed more than 12,500 Americans, around 110,000 Japanese defenders, and at least 100,000 Okinawan civilians, a figure that has never been established with confidence and is probably higher. That civilian toll is the reason Okinawa is remembered differently in Japan than any other battle of the war. The Japanese command ended on the 22nd of June 1945. Ushijima and Cho took their own lives in the headquarters tunnel under Shuri. Before doing so, Ushijima gave Colonel Yahara an explicit order: do not follow us. Escape, survive, and report to Tokyo what actually happened here. Yahara tried to get off the island, was captured in July, and was interrogated at length by American officers. He went home to a country where his survival was regarded by his surviving peers as a disgrace, and where another staff officer publicly blamed him for the whole strategy. There is an honest footnote here. Yahara's plan is often described as brilliant, and militarily it did what it was designed to do. It is also true that its entire purpose was to prolong a battle that its own author believed was already lost, on an island covered in civilians, in order to delay an invasion of Japan that never came. 28 years after the war, Hall pledged his account of it, partly to explain the strategy and partly to defend his own survival. Both of those motives are in the book, and readers should know that going in. The book is called The Battle for Okinawa, published in Japan in 1973 and in English in 1995. It is the only full account of the battle from inside the Japanese High Command, and it exists because a dying general ordered a subordinate to stay alive and tell the truth. Whether Yahara told all of it is argued by historians and is worth arguing. What is not argued is that without that order, we would know almost nothing about why the last battle of the Second World War was fought the way it was. Major Henry Alexius Courtney Jr. died on the 15th of May 1945 on Sugar Loaf Hill, Okinawa. He was 29. He was buried first in the 6th Marine Division Cemetery on the island and brought home to Calvary Cemetery in Duluth, Minnesota, on the 29th of March 1949. His Medal of Honor was presented to his parents in Duluth on the 30th of December 1947. Camp Courtney, a United States Marine Corps installation on Okinawa, is named for him. It is about 20 miles from the hill, and Marines are stationed there today. Sugar Loaf itself is now inside the city of Naha, with a water tank on top and a small memorial at the base. If your father, your grandfather, your uncle, anyone in your family served in the Pacific, in any branch, on any ship, leave their name and what they did in the comments below. Don't just leave the name. Tell us one thing about them. One thing they did or said, or one thing you remember. A unit, a rank, a town they came home to, a job they went back to. The men who were there deserve more than a name in a database. They deserve to be remembered as people. Subscribe if you want the next story. There are more of them.